I sat with the photographs for 2 hours before I admitted what was wrong with them. This was mid-October, 6 weeks after we'd closed on the property. 14 acres outside Hardin, Kentucky, rolling land with a mixed hardwood stand running along the eastern boundary, maybe 4 acres of oak and beech and tulip poplar that the previous owner's family had never logged. Rachel loved the trees. That was the reason we'd stretched beyond our budget. She said the woods made the rest of it make sense. The outdated wiring, the slow well pump, the 40-minute drive to anything. I didn't argue. I liked the woods too. I'd been walking them most afternoons since we moved in. No trail, just my own path, wearing in through the understory. A rough loop I'd figured out that hit the creek twice and came back through the big beeches near the fence line. I took photographs because I was trying to learn the trees, not in any serious way. I downloaded an identification app, and I was photographing bark and leaves, trying to match what I was seeing to names I could remember. I had maybe 200 images on my phone by mid-October. That evening, Rachel was out Tuesday night thing with her sister, and I was scrolling through the photos, deleting the blurry ones, when I noticed the figure. It was in a photograph from the previous Saturday. I'd been shooting the bark of a shagbark hickory, standing maybe 10 feet from the trunk, and the background was out of focus, but not unreadable. 30 yards behind the tree, between 2 thinner trunks, there was a person standing in the woods. I don't mean a shadow. I don't mean a shape that suggested a person. The posture was upright. The proportions were correct. The clothing, or what I took to be clothing, was dark and unremarkable. It was a person standing among trees at a distance, slightly blurred, exactly the way a person would look in the background of a photograph you'd taken of something else. I enlarged the image. The resolution degraded, but not enough to explain what I was seeing. The figure had no face, not a blurred face, not a face turned away or obscured by a branch. The head was there. The shape of it was normal. But where the features should have been there was a smooth, undifferentiated surface, lighter than the surrounding skin, like a mannequin head that had never been painted. My genuine first thought, was that it was a compression artifact. JPEG does strange things to out-of-focus areas. I'd seen faces in photographs turn into smears before. I looked at the image metadata. The phone had shot it at a high enough resolution that the background, even soft, should have retained more detail than what I was seeing. But I also knew that tree shadow, dappled light, and digital compression can conspire to produce strange effects. I set the phone down and decided it was an artifact. I picked the phone back up 11 minutes later. I know the time because I'd started a show, and I checked the timestamp when I paused it. I went through every photograph from that Saturday. 43 images. The figure was in 4 of them. The 4 photographs had been taken over a span of about 20 minutes, based on the timestamps. I'd been walking the loop, stopping to photograph bark and leaves, and in 4 of the shots taken from different positions, at different angles. Facing different directions, the figure was visible in the background. In one, it was perhaps 50 yards away. In another, closer to 20. The light on it changed between images in a way that was consistent with the sun moving through canopy. The blur varied with distance. In every image, the head was featureless in exactly the same way. I went back further. I checked photographs from the previous Wednesday. I found it in 2 of them. Thursday, 1. The Tuesday before that, 3. I stopped checking. It was after midnight. The house was quiet, and the woods were 200 feet from the bedroom window, and I did not check any more photographs that night. The next morning, I walked the property in daylight and felt foolish about it. The woods were October woods, thinning canopy, good visibility, a strong smell of leaf decay. I walked my usual loop. I saw nothing unusual. I took photographs deliberately, long shots down sight lines, wide angles that captured as much background as possible. I reviewed them on the spot, enlarging each one, scanning for any shape that didn't belong. Nothing. I spent that evening going through every photograph on my phone from the 6 weeks since we'd moved in. I was systematic about it. I made a count. Out of 214 photographs taken in or near the woods, the figure appeared in 19. 19 photographs across 5 weeks. Never in the foreground. Never in focus. Never in the same position twice. Never absent for more than 4 consecutive days of shooting. Always with that same featureless quality where the face should be. I showed Rachel 3 of the clearest images the following night. I didn't frame it as anything frightening. I said I thought someone might be walking through our woods, maybe a neighbor, maybe a hunter who didn't know the land had sold. She looked at the photos. She could see the figure. She agreed it looked like a person. When I enlarged the face area, she squinted and said it looked like the photo was just bad in that spot. She suggested I post the no trespassing signs we'd bought and hadn't put up yet. I put up the signs that weekend. 12 of them, spaced around the tree line and along the old fence. I also did something I didn't mention to Rachel. I set up our old tablet in the kitchen window that faces the eastern tree line, propped it against the glass, and left the camera app running in time-lapse mode, capturing 1 frame every 30 seconds from dawn to dusk. The first day of time-lapse captured nothing. Second day, nothing. Third day, a Thursday, I reviewed 8 hours of frames and found a single image taken at 2:47 in the afternoon that showed a dark, upright shape at the tree line, approximately where the trail enters the woods. The frame before it and the frame after it showed nothing there. A single 30-second window. I started spending more time in the woods. I want to be precise about what I mean, because I've had people tell me I became obsessed, and I understand why it looks that way from outside. But I was not investigating in the way you investigate a mystery. I was walking my own property trying to see something I had already seen in photographs. The distinction mattered to me then. It matters less now. Through the rest of October, I walked the loop twice a day, once in the morning, once in the late afternoon when the light was the same as in most of the photographs. I carried my phone and took pictures continuously. I reviewed them each evening. The figure continued to appear. Not every day, not in every batch, but often enough that I could not explain it as a recurring compression artifact, because it was never in the same position relative to me or to the trees, and its apparent distance varied in ways that were consistent with physical space. I never saw it while I was in the woods. That sentence is important enough that I want to say it again. In 6 weeks of daily walks, during which the figure appeared in my photographs regularly, I never once saw it with my eyes. Not as a shape, not as a movement, not as a feeling of being watched, which people always ask about. I felt fine in the woods. I liked being there. The disconnect between what I experienced and what the camera recorded was, in its own way, more disturbing than the figure itself. In early November, I bought a used trail camera, an infrared unit, motion-activated, the kind hunters use. I mounted it on an oak at about chest height, facing the section of the loop where the figure appeared most often, and I set it to shoot 3-frame bursts on any detected motion. The trail camera captured deer, squirrels, a possum, a turkey, a neighborhood dog I'd seen before. My own legs, twice, when I forgot to turn it off before walking past. In 3 weeks, it never captured the figure. I moved it to 2 other locations. Same result. I put up a second trail camera, then a third, borrowed from a co-worker. 3 cameras covering 3 sections of the loop, all motion activated, all running 24 hours. Combined, they generated thousands of images over 2 weeks. Animals, weather, me, no figure. During those same 2 weeks, my phone captured the figure in 11 photographs. I tried to be rational about this. I considered the possibility that my phone's camera had a defect, a sensor artifact that, under certain lighting conditions, produced a shape that my brain interpreted as a human figure. I borrowed Rachel's phone and walked the loop with both phones, taking paired photographs of the same scenes. The figure appeared in 2 of my images. It appeared in one of Rachel's, taken 9 seconds later from approximately the same position. That was November 19th. I remember the date because it was the day I stopped trying to explain it as a camera issue. I told Rachel that evening that I thought someone was actually in the woods and we should call the county sheriff. She asked what I would tell them. I said someone was trespassing regularly on our property. She asked if I'd ever seen the person. I said no, but I had photographs. She said the photographs showed a blurry shape in the background and that the sheriff would think I was wasting their time. She wasn't wrong. I didn't call. Instead, I did something that, in retrospect, was the first step in a direction I didn't understand yet. I went to the county library and looked up the property history. I want to be clear about my reason. I was not looking for a haunting. I was not looking for a death or a crime or a tragedy associated with the land. I was looking for an easement, a legal right-of-way that might explain why someone was regularly walking through the woods. Old rural properties sometimes have easements for neighbors to cross, access to a creek for livestock water, that kind of thing. I thought maybe someone had been crossing our land for years and hadn't stopped when the property changed hands. The county clerk's office had records going back to the 1920s. The property had been in the Alford family from 1923 to 2019. Nearly 100 years, when the last surviving Alford, a woman named Betty, had moved to assisted living and the property had been sold to a developer who'd done nothing with it and flipped it to us. There were no easements on file, no rights of way, no shared access agreements. But there was something else. While pulling the property records, the clerk, a woman about 60 who'd been helpful in a quiet, efficient way, had glanced at the address and said, "Oh, the Alford place." She'd said it the way you say something you recognize but don't particularly want to discuss. I asked if she knew the family. She said everybody knew the Alfords. I asked what she meant. She said they'd been there a long time and left it at that. I might have let it go. But I'd been looking at photographs of a faceless figure on my property for 2 months. And I had reached the point where any thread felt worth pulling. I asked around town. Not aggressively, I wasn't interrogating people. I mentioned to the woman at the hardware store that we'd bought the old Alford place, and I was curious about the property. I said the same thing to a man at the feed store where I'd been buying bird seed. The responses followed a pattern. People would acknowledge the name. They would say something vague. Been there forever. Kept to themselves. Nice enough people. And then the conversation would develop a quality I can only describe as completed. Not hostile, not evasive, just done. The exception was a man named Dale, who ran a small engine repair shop on the state road. I'd brought our mower in for service, and when he asked where I lived and I told him, he said, "You walk those woods much?" I said I did. He said, "You take pictures?" I hadn't told him about the photographs. I hadn't told anyone in town about the photographs. I said, "Yes, I took pictures of the trees." He nodded and said, "Betty used to paint them. I asked what she painted. The trees, he said. She'd set up out there with a little easel and paint the trees. She did that for years, decades probably. He looked at me with an expression I didn't know how to read. Then he said, "She told me once that the paintings never came out right. She said there was always something in them she hadn't put there." I asked what she meant. "A shape," he said, "standing in the trees. She'd paint the woods exactly as she saw them, and when the painting was finished, there'd be a figure in it she hadn't painted. She thought she was losing her mind for a while. She even stopped painting, but she went back to it eventually. She said it was easier once she stopped being afraid of it." He turned back to the mower. She also said it didn't have a face. I sat in my truck in his parking lot for a long time after that conversation. Here is what I understood at that point. Whatever was appearing in my photographs had appeared in Betty Alford's paintings. Across different decades, different media, different people, the same phenomenon. An apparently human figure, faceless, visible only in the created image and never to the naked eye. And here is what I did not understand. Everything else. I drove home and walked directly into the woods. It was late afternoon, overcast, the trees nearly bare. I walked the full loop and I stopped in the middle of it, in the densest part of the stand where the beeches grow close together. And I stood still and looked. I saw trees. I saw the dark lattice of branches against a white sky. I saw dead leaves on the ground and the mossy remains of a fallen trunk I'd photographed weeks earlier. I saw my own breath. I did not see a figure. I raised my phone and took a photograph without looking through the screen, just pointed it ahead of me and pressed the shutter. I looked at the image immediately. The figure was there, 20 yards ahead of me, between two beeches, facing me. The proportions were clearer than in any previous photograph. The light was flat and even, and the image was sharp. A human shape, dark clothing. That same smooth, blank area where the face should have been. Not shadowed, not obscured, absent. I looked up from the phone. I looked at the exact spot in the actual woods where the figure appeared in the photograph. There was nothing there. I took 3 steps forward, raised the phone again, and took another picture. The figure was still in the image, but further away now, as though it had maintained the same distance from me by stepping back. I did this 4 more times. Each photograph showed the figure. Each time I looked with my eyes, the woods were empty. Each time I stepped forward, the figure in the next photograph had retreated by roughly the same distance. On the 7th photograph, it was gone. I walked home in the dark. I didn't tell Rachel about the conversation with Dale that night. I didn't tell her about the photographs from that afternoon. I was not protecting her from anything. I was protecting the experience from the process of explaining it, which I think is a different impulse than people assume. Over the following week, I tried to find Betty Alford. The clerk had said she'd moved to assisted living. There were 3 facilities within reasonable driving distance. I called the first 2 and asked if they had a resident by that name. The first said no. The second said they couldn't release resident information. The third, a place called Creekside Manor in a town called Elton, 40 minutes east, said yes. Betty was a resident and asked if I was family. I said I'd bought her old property and wanted to ask her a few questions about it. The woman on the phone said Betty had good days and bad days, but she'd pass along the message. 2 days later, I got a call back saying Betty would be happy to see me. Creekside Manor was a low brick building that smelled like floor cleaner and cooked vegetables. Betty Alford was in a room at the end of a hallway. She was 87, small, white-haired, surprisingly alert. She had a window that looked out onto a parking lot and a bookshelf with no books on it, only framed photographs. I introduced myself and told her we'd bought the property. She said she knew someone in town had mentioned it. She asked how we liked the house. I said we liked it fine. She asked about the well pump, and I said it was slow. She said it had always been slow. Then she said, "You're here about the woods." I said I was. She nodded as if this were expected and unremarkable. "How long did it take you?" I said about 6 weeks. "Faster than me," she said. "But I wasn't using a camera. I was painting. It showed up in the paintings first. I thought I was doing it without realizing, like some kind of unconscious mark. The way people doodle without thinking. I painted over it a few times. It came back. Different position each time, but always in the trees." I asked her when this started. 1971, she said. I was 32. I'd been painting the woods since I was a teenager, and it had never happened before. Then one spring it started, and it never stopped. I asked her what she thought it was. She looked at me with clarity that didn't waver. "I think it's something that lives in the woods that you can't see," she said. "I think it's always been there. And I think the only way it shows up is when someone makes an image of the place where it is. A painting, a photograph, maybe a drawing. I don't know. I never tried drawing. It doesn't show up in mirrors. It doesn't show up on video. I tried a camcorder in the 80s. Nothing. It shows up in still images, single moments." She said this the way you describe the behavior of a familiar animal, not with fear, but with a particular precision that comes from long observation. I told her about the trail cameras, how they'd never captured it. She nodded. "Motion cameras take pictures because something triggers them," she said. "It doesn't trigger them. It's not moving when the image is made, or it's not there in a way that triggers motion. I don't know the technical part. I just know it doesn't work." I asked about the face. "There isn't one," she said. "I painted it 100 times, and there's never a face. The head is there, the shape is right, but the face is smooth, like it was never finished." She paused. "Or like it's not for us." I asked what she meant. "I mean, maybe it has a face," she said. "Just not one that translates into a picture. Like there's something there the paint can't hold, and the camera can't record. So what shows up is nothing. A blank." I sat with that for a moment. Then I asked the question that had brought me to her room. "Is it dangerous?" She took a long time to answer. Not because she was unsure, I think, but because she was deciding how much precision the answer required. "No," she said. "I don't think it's dangerous. I walked those woods almost every day for 60 years, and nothing ever happened to me. Nothing happened to my parents or my grandmother. Nothing happened to the dogs or the animals. The woods are healthy. The trees grow fine. Whatever it is, it doesn't seem to interfere with anything. But," she looked at me, "but it knows you're making images. When you take a picture and it appears, it's not an accident. It's in the frame because you made the frame. You created a still image, and it entered the still image. Every time. That means it's aware of what you're doing, and it's choosing to be seen. Why?" "I don't know," she said. "I spent 50 years asking that, and I don't know. Maybe it can only be seen that way, and it wants to be seen. Maybe it's not choosing anything, and it's just a property of what it is, like how you can't see certain things without a microscope. Maybe the image is the microscope." She turned toward the window. The parking lot was empty except for a delivery truck. "There was one time it was different," she said. One time in 50 years. I waited. 1989, July. I was painting the creek bed. There's a spot where the water comes over a little limestone ledge. You probably know it. I finished the painting at dusk. Took it inside. The figure was in it, further back than usual, almost at the edge of the canvas. That was normal. But when I looked closely, the figure was facing away from me. In every other painting, every other image, it had been facing toward me. Toward the painter, toward the camera. That was the only time it was turned away. What was it facing? The deeper woods, she said. The part past the creek where the ground rises toward the ridge. Was there something there? Not that I could see, not in the painting, and not when I went and looked the next morning. But I felt different about that painting. All the others, I got used to them. That one I didn't hang up. I put it in the closet. I still think about it. I asked why. Because it meant there was something in those woods it was looking at instead of me. And I had no idea what could be more interesting than the person making the image. She said that quietly. Not dramatically. The way you describe a sound you heard once at night that you never identified and never heard again. I visited Betty 2 more times. The second visit, she showed me photographs, actual printed photographs she'd taken with a 35mm camera in the 1980s and 90s. She had a shoebox of them. I sat in her room and went through them one by one. Woods in different seasons, the creek, the big beaches, and in roughly a third of them, the figure. Standing among the trees, facing the camera. No face. The figure in her film photographs looked identical to the figure in my digital images. Same proportions, same posture, same smooth blank where the features should have been. Across 30 years and 2 completely different imaging technologies, it was the same. The third visit, I brought my phone and showed her my photographs. She looked through them slowly, nodding at each one. When she reached the set from the afternoon I'd walked toward it and it had retreated, she paused. You walked toward it? I said I had. I never did that, she said. I never approached it. I don't know why. It never occurred to me to try. She looked at the sequence, the figure maintaining its distance, stepping back as I stepped forward, then disappearing on the 7th frame. She counted the images twice. It let you get closer than it ever let me, she said. In my paintings, it was never less than 50 yards. Some of yours, it looks like it's 20. I didn't know what to do with that observation. I still don't. After the third visit, Betty's health declined. I called in early December and was told she was no longer receiving visitors. I sent a card. I don't know if she read it. In December, I did something I had been resisting. I took a photograph in the woods, and instead of looking at it immediately, I waited. I put the phone in my pocket. I walked the rest of the loop. I went home. I made dinner. I sat with Rachel and watched television. At 10 o'clock, I opened the phone and looked at the image. The figure was there. Close, maybe 15 yards, half hidden behind a beech trunk, facing the camera. And for the first time, there was something different about the blank space where the face should have been. It was not smooth. There was a faint variation in the surface, an unevenness, like something pressing outward from beneath a membrane. Not features, not a face, but the suggestion of structure underneath, as though the blankness were not absence, but covering. I enlarged the image until the pixels dissolved. The impression held. Something was under there. I deleted the photograph. I want to be honest about that. I deleted it immediately, and I cannot fully explain why. It was a physical reflex, like pulling your hand from a hot surface. The image felt like it had crossed a boundary that the others hadn't. Not because it was more frightening, because it was more intimate. Like the difference between seeing someone across a room and seeing them lean toward you. I did not walk the woods for 2 weeks after that. When I went back, in late December, the trees were bare and the light was thin and gray. I brought the phone, but I did not take any photographs. I walked the entire loop. I stood at the spot near the beaches where I'd taken the deleted image. I looked at the woods around me and saw exactly what was there. Bare trees, dead leaves, cold air, the sound of the creek. I raised the phone. I opened the camera. I looked at the screen without pressing the shutter, just held the phone up and watched the live preview, the real-time image of the woods in front of me. The screen showed the woods. Trees, leaves, creek, no figure. I pressed the shutter. The screen froze into a still image. And in the still image, the figure was there. Close, closer than it had ever been. Maybe 10 yards, facing the camera. I tapped the screen to return to the live preview. The woods, in real time, with no figure. I pressed the shutter. The still image, with the figure, closer by a step. Live preview, empty woods. Still image, closer. I understood then, not intellectually, but in some more fundamental way, what I was looking at. The figure did not exist in continuous time. It existed in the stopped moment, the frozen frame, the single captured instant extracted from the flow of seconds. It lived in the gap between one moment and the next, in the immeasurable space the camera opens when it turns motion into stillness. It was not in the woods the way a deer is in the woods. It was in the woods the way a photograph is in a camera. It was there only when the moment was held. I lowered the phone. I put it in my pocket. I walked home. That night, I told Rachel everything. She listened without interrupting, which is not her usual way, and which told me she was taking it seriously. When I finished, she asked to see the photographs. I showed her the ones I had. She went through them for a long time. Finally, she said, "What do you want to do?" I said I didn't know. "Do you want to sell the property?" I thought about it. "No," I said. "I don't think it's dangerous. Betty lived there for 60 years. "Do you want to stop taking pictures?" "I think so," I said. "For now." "Okay," she said. And that was the conversation. I am aware that this sounds insufficient, but Rachel has a quality I lack, which is the ability to accept a situation without needing to resolve it. She didn't tell me I was wrong or right. She didn't suggest explanations. She treated it the way she'd treat a problem with the foundation or the septic, something real, something to be aware of, something that didn't necessarily require immediate action. I stopped photographing the woods. I kept walking them. Through the winter and into the spring, I walked my loop almost every day, and I left the phone in the house. The woods were the woods. I saw birds. I saw deer. I heard the creek. I felt nothing unusual. Whatever the figure was, it did not manifest in unrecorded experience. In April, Rachel's mother visited for a week. On a warm afternoon, she walked with me through the woods. She had her phone out. She photographs everything, always has, and she was taking pictures of wildflowers. That evening, she was showing Rachel the photos on her phone. I was in the kitchen. I heard Rachel's mother say, "Oh, this one came out strange." I walked into the living room. Rachel looked at me. Her mother was holding out the phone, showing a photograph of trillium flowers on the forest floor. In the background, between two trees, there was a figure. It was far back 60 yards, maybe more. But it was there. No face. Must be a glitch, her mother said, and swiped to the next image. Rachel and I looked at each other across the room. Neither of us said anything. Her mother left at the end of the week. As far as I know, she never looked at that photograph again, and it remains on her phone, unexamined. Part of a vacation album she'll scroll past for years without stopping. We're still in the house. It's been over a year now. I don't take photographs in the woods, and neither does Rachel. We've never told anyone not to, but when people visit, we tend to steer walks toward the western side of the property, away from the trees. It's not a policy. It's an instinct that has become a habit. Last month, though, something happened that I haven't been able to set down. I was replacing a section of fence along the eastern boundary where the woods start. I'd been working for an hour, stretching wire, and I'd taken my gloves off to eat a sandwich. I was sitting on the tailgate of the truck, looking into the tree line, not thinking about much. My phone was in my pocket. I had not opened the camera in months, but I was looking at the woods, and the woods were ordinary. And then for a span of time, I cannot precisely measure less than a second, more than an instant I saw it. Not in a photograph, not on a screen, with my eyes. It was standing just inside the tree line, maybe 30 yards in the shadow of a beech. Upright, human proportions, dark. And where the face should have been, that same smooth blankness, that same absence, but rendered now not in pixels or paint, but in actual three-dimensional space, in the depth and texture of the real physical world. It was looking at me. I don't know how to say that about something with no face, but the orientation of the head, the angle of the body, the absolute stillness of it, it was looking at me. And then it was not there. Not like it moved, not like it faded. The moment simply resumed, and the thing that had been visible in the stopped moment between 1 second and the next was no longer in the continuous flow of time, where I live and breathe and think. I sat on the tailgate for a long time. My sandwich was in my hand. The fence wire was waiting. The woods were just woods. But something has changed. Not in the woods, in me. Because for 11 months I had understood the rule. The one rule that made the whole thing bearable. It existed in still images. Only in still images. In the frozen moment. Not in lived, continuous, moving reality. And now I have seen it with my own eyes. In real time, in my own unmediated vision. Which means either the rule has changed, or the rule was never what I thought it was. And I don't know which of those possibilities is worse. I have not taken a photograph since. I have not stopped walking the woods. I sit on the porch in the evenings and watch the tree line go dark. And sometimes, not every night, not even most nights, but sometimes I find myself not blinking, holding my eyes open and still, as though my own vision, held steady long enough, might become the kind of stillness it lives in. I told Rachel that. She said, "Then blink." I am trying to. That was June. The summer came in hard, 3 weeks in the high 90s. No rain. The creek dropping to a trickle over the limestone ledge. I worked the fence. I mowed. I fixed the porch railing that had been soft since we moved in. Normal things. I did not stop walking the woods, but I stopped lingering in them. My loop, which had been a 40-minute wander, became a 20-minute transit. In and out. I told myself I was being efficient because of the heat. Rachel didn't push me on it. She knew I was still going in. I think she decided that the walking was better than the not walking. That the day I stopped entering the woods entirely would be the day she'd worry. She may have been right about that. What I didn't tell her what I'm telling now because it's part of what happened and I can't leave it out is that after the fence line sighting, my vision started doing something I couldn't explain. It wasn't constant, it wasn't dramatic, but several times a day, for a duration that never exceeded a heartbeat, the world would, I don't have a good word for this, the world would harden. That's the closest I can get. The visual field would go from its normal fluid state, that seamless continuity of motion and light that you don't think about because you've never experienced anything else, to something fixed, rigid. Every object suddenly possessing the hyper-specific clarity of a thing seen in a photograph. Not blurred by movement or attention, not softened by the way the eye naturally drifts. Just still, absolute. A single frame extracted from the stream. And in those moments, always in peripheral vision, never where I was directly looking, there was a shape. I couldn't describe it any better than that. Not the figure in full, not the faceless head and the dark posture I knew from the photographs. Just a presence at the edge of vision, there for the duration of the hardened instant, gone when the world resumed its motion. This happened in the woods. It happened in the house. It happened in the hardware store in town, and in the parking lot of the grocery store, and once while I was driving on the state road at 50 miles an hour. It was not tied to the property. It was tied to me. I made an appointment with an optometrist in early July. I described the symptom without context. I said I was experiencing brief moments of unusual visual clarity, accompanied by the impression of a shape in my peripheral field. She dilated my pupils. She examined my retinas. She tested my visual fields with a machine that flashed lights in different positions while I pressed a button. Everything was normal. She said the episodes sounded like they could be a visual migraine variant, or possibly a form of palinopsia, a condition where images persist or recur after the stimulus is gone. She recommended I see a neurologist if it continued. I didn't see a neurologist, not because I was in denial, because I didn't believe what was happening to me was medical. In mid-July, I drove back to Dale's shop, not to ask him questions, or not exactly. I'd been thinking about what he'd said about Betty, how she'd told him the paintings never came out right. I wanted to know if he knew more than he'd said. Dale was under a riding mower when I pulled in. He slid out, wiped his hands, looked at me and said, "You look thin." I hadn't noticed, but he was right. I'd lost weight. The heat, the work, the 20-minute walks that were somehow burning more energy than the old 40-minute ones. I told him I'd been busy with the property. He offered me a soda from a cooler inside the shop. We sat on a bench outside. The conversation took a while to get where it was going because Dale was not a man who could be steered. You talked about what he wanted to talk about: the weather, the county fair, a transmission he was rebuilding, and eventually, the channel opened. "You still taking pictures out there?" he asked. I said I'd stopped. He nodded slowly. Betty stopped painting for a while too. Couple of times, actually. First time was early on, when it scared her. Second time was, I don't know, 85, 86. She said she needed a break. Went almost 2 years without painting. What happened when she went back? Same as before. First painting, there it was. Did it ever? I paused, not sure how to ask the question without sounding like I'd lost my grip. Did she ever see it without the painting? Dale looked at me. He had pale blue eyes, deep set, and they didn't move from my face for a long time. She mentioned that once, he said. Toward the end, before she moved. She said she'd started seeing it without the easel, just in the regular world, for a second at a time. What did she do? She moved. He sipped his soda. I don't think she moved because of that. She was 85. She needed help. The house was too much for her. But I think it made the decision easier. I sat with that. Then I asked something I hadn't planned to ask. Dale, how do you know all this? Were you close with her? Not especially, he said. I've been fixing mowers and chainsaws in this county for 40 years. People talk to the repairman. They tell you things they wouldn't tell their preacher because you're already on your back under their equipment, and they figure you're not really listening. He paused. Also, I grew up on the next property over. My family's land bordered the Alford Woods on the north side. I looked at him. I played in those woods as a kid, he said. Me and my brother. We were in there all the time, every summer. Never saw a thing. He set down the soda can. But my brother liked to draw. He'd bring a sketch pad out and draw the trees. And one summer we were maybe 12, 13, he started putting a person in his drawings. I asked him who it was. He said he didn't know. He said his hand did it. He said he'd draw the trees, and when he was done, there'd be a person standing in them that he hadn't meant to draw. Did it have no face? Dale said. No, never did. The air was very hot and very still. A wasp was circling the rim of his soda can. My brother stopped drawing after that summer. He's an electrician in Louisville now. I don't think he's picked up a pencil since he was 14. I asked him about it once, years later, and he said he didn't remember any of it. Completely blank. Not like he was hiding it, like it was genuinely gone. And you? I never drew, Dale said. I never painted. I don't take photographs. I don't even own a phone with a camera. I've got a flip phone. Look. He pulled it out of his pocket, an old Kyocera, no lens on it. I've had this thing for 15 years. People think I'm crazy. I tell them I just don't need all that. He put the phone back. But the truth is, I decided a long time ago that I wasn't going to make any pictures of any kind. Not anywhere, but especially not in those woods. And I have not had the experience that Betty had, or that my brother had, or that I suspect you are having. I don't see it. I don't capture it. I leave it alone, and it leaves me alone. He looked at the tree line beyond his property. A different stretch of forest, but contiguous with ours. Part of the same ridge of hardwoods that ran along the eastern side of the valley. I think it shows up when you make a still image, because that's the only time it can show up, he said. I think it exists in a way that doesn't have anything to do with how we normally see. And I think when you make an image, a painting, a drawing, a photograph, you're creating a little window that's shaped like its kind of existence instead of ours. And it's on the other side of that window. It always has been. Then why am I seeing it without a camera now? Dale didn't answer for a minute. The wasp had settled on the can's edge and was drinking from the residue inside. I think, he said slowly, that you've made enough windows that your eyes are starting to work like one. I drove home. I sat in the truck in the driveway and looked at the tree line. The light was beginning to go amber with the late afternoon. The woods were beautiful in the way they were always beautiful, the way that had made Rachel say they made the rest of the place make sense. I went inside and sat at the kitchen table and held very still. Not deliberately at first, then deliberately. I held my head motionless, my eyes fixed on the window that faced the trees, and I tried not to blink. The world hardened. The frame froze. And in the window, faint and far but absolutely present, the shape was standing at the tree line. I blinked. Gone. I understand what this sounds like. I understand that from outside this story, I am a man who bought a house in the country and gradually came to believe that a faceless figure was haunting his woods, and that the obvious explanation involves stress, isolation, pareidolia, and perhaps a pre-existing tendency toward obsessive thinking. I've considered all of that. I've considered it more carefully and more honestly than anyone reading this will consider it, because I have more at stake in the answer. But pareidolia does not appear in paintings made by a woman who is dead serious and clear-eyed about what she saw. Obsessive thinking does not produce an identical figure on another person's phone. Stress does not generate matching descriptions from a man's childhood brother 4 decades earlier. Something is in those woods. Something that exists in a way my eyes aren't built for, but that a camera or a paintbrush or a pencil can accidentally translate. Something that has been there longer than the Alfords and will be there longer than me. And I have spent enough time pressing the shutter, making enough of those little windows, that whatever boundary my vision used to have is thinning. I stopped taking photographs months ago. The hardening of the visual field has not stopped. It has not gotten more frequent, but it has not diminished. Once or twice a day, for a fraction of a second, the world goes flat and still, and the figure is there at the edge. In August, I did one more thing that I need to describe. I couldn't sleep. It was 2 a.m, hot, Rachel breathing evenly beside me. I got up and went to the kitchen and stood at the window. The moon was nearly full. The tree line was a dark wall of silver-edged shapes. I don't know why I did what I did next. Maybe I wanted to test Dale's theory about windows. Maybe I wanted to prove that I was wrong about all of it. Maybe I was just tired enough that the membrane between wanting to know and being afraid to know had dissolved. I cupped my hands around my eyes like a child making pretend binoculars. I pressed the edges of my hands against my face, creating a narrow rectangular frame, a viewfinder made of skin and bone. And I held absolutely still. And I looked through the frame I'd made with my own hands, and I did not blink. For 3 seconds, nothing happened. The tree line was the tree line. Then the world hardened. And through the frame of my hands, in the moonlit gap between 2 oaks at the edge of the wood, the figure was standing. Not at the edge of my peripheral vision, not faint, fully there, still, facing me. That same smooth absence where the face should be, now rendered in moonlight and shadow. And I could see, or I believe I could see the surface of the blankness moving slightly. Shifting, the way skin shifts over muscle, as if whatever was behind the blank was trying to arrange itself into features and could not hold the configuration. I dropped my hands. The figure was gone. The tree line was ordinary. I stood in the kitchen and breathed. My hands were shaking. Not from fear exactly, from the understanding that Dale was right. My eyes were becoming windows. The frame of my hands had worked the way a viewfinder works, the way the edges of a canvas work, the way the borders of a photograph work. It was the framing that did it, the act of extracting a rectangle of the world and holding it still. That was what created the condition in which the thing could be perceived. And I had just done it with my own body. I went back to bed. Rachel turned over and said, "You okay?" And I said yes. She went back to sleep. I lay awake until dawn, looking at the ceiling, understanding that I could never unknow what I had just confirmed. I could frame my own vision. I could hold it still. And when I did, I could see the thing that lived in the stillness, the question that kept me awake, the one I have not resolved and do not expect to resolve, is whether the learning goes one direction. I can see it more easily now. My eyes are adapting or being adapted, or have been changed by the months of photographs in ways I don't have the language for. But what about the other direction? If I'm becoming more able to perceive it, is it becoming more able to perceive me? Not through a photograph, not through the mediated window of a created image, but directly. eye to whatever it has instead of eyes. Betty saw it without the easel near the end. And then she left. Dale's brother forgot everything. Dale never made an image in his life. 3 different responses to the same thing. Betty accommodated it until she couldn't. Dale's brother erased it. Dale refused to start. I'm sitting with the question of which response is mine. We're not leaving. I said that already, and I mean it. This is our home. Rachel loves the property. I love the property. The house is good. The land is good. The woods are what they are, and they are also beautiful. And I do not believe those 2 things cancel each other out. But I've started doing something that I don't fully understand. And I mention it here because I think it's relevant, and because I think it might be the actual ending of the story, if it has one. I've started painting, not the woods, not yet. I bought supplies in town, a small easel, acrylics, a pad of canvas paper. I set up on the porch, and I've been painting the western field, the side of the property, away from the trees. Wildflowers, the fence line, the road. I am not good at it. The colors are wrong, and the proportions are clumsy, and Rachel says they look like something from a dentist's waiting room, which is accurate and fair. But I'm learning to look at the world the way a painter looks at it. In still compositions, framed rectangles, moments of arrested light. I am training my eyes to do consciously what the camera did mechanically, and I know this with the same certainty. I know the well pump is slow and the porch railing was soft, that eventually I will turn the easel east. I will paint the woods, and the figure will be in the painting. And when it is, it will not be something my hand did without my knowledge. It will not be an accident, or an artifact, or a compression glitch. It will be a portrait. The only kind of portrait you can make of something that lives in still frames. I think that's what it's been waiting for. Not to be captured, not to be feared, not to be investigated or explained or fled from, and to be seen, deliberately, by someone who knows it's there. I can't prove that. I don't have evidence. I have 19 photographs I haven't deleted, and a shoebox of Betty Alford's prints that she gave me on my last visit, and the memory of a moonlit shape that tried to make a face and couldn't, and a husband's intuition that says the thing in the woods is not malicious, just fundamentally, irreparably alone, in a way that has nothing to do with the kind of loneliness I understand. I paint the western field. The paintings are bad. The figure has not appeared in them. But last Thursday I painted the fence line at the point where it turns east and the first oaks begin. Just the corner. Just the edge of where the woods start. I finished the painting and brought it inside and leaned it against the wall to dry. It showed the fence, the grass, the first 2 trees, and a strip of shadow between them. In the shadow, barely visible, no larger than a thumbprint of darker paint, there was a shape I'd not put there. Upright. Still. Waiting at the boundary of the composition, just inside the frame, as if it had taken one step out of the woods, and toward the open field for the first time in its existence. I left the painting where it was. Rachel saw it the next morning. She looked at it for a long time. She didn't say anything about the shape. I don't know if she saw it, or if it only resolves for the person who made the image. I didn't ask. Some questions are better held than answered. The painting is still against the wall. I haven't started another one. But the easel is on the porch, facing east now. I turned it this morning. I didn't plan to. I just went out with my coffee, and my hand found the leg of the easel and swung it around. And when I stepped back, it was pointing toward the tree line, like a compass needle that had finally been allowed to settle. I stood there looking at it for a while. The woods were green and full, and morning light was moving through them in the way it does. dappled and shifting and continuous. Somewhere in there, standing in a stillness I can almost reach, the thing without a face is waiting to be painted. I think tomorrow I'll start. I started the painting on a Saturday because Rachel was home, and I wanted her nearby without being able to explain exactly why. She was inside, cleaning the kitchen, visible through the window. I set up the easel on the porch, positioned the canvas, and looked at the woods. The morning was clear and warm, early September, the trees still holding their full summer weight. I'd chosen a view that centered on the gap in the tree line where my walking path enters the woods, the same corridor where the figure appeared most often in photographs. I mixed paint on the palette and I began. I am not a skilled painter. I want to repeat that because it matters for what happened. I was not producing art. I was producing a clumsy, earnest representation of what I saw. The trunks were too thick or too thin. The colors were close, but not right. The shadows were flat. I worked slowly, building the image the way I'd watched a YouTube tutorial describe it. Background first, large shapes, then smaller shapes, then details. It took most of the morning. By noon, I had something that was recognizably the tree line, as seen from my porch. Not good, not terrible. A painting of woods by a person who had been painting for 3 weeks. The figure was not in it. I stood back and looked. I examined every shadow between the trunks, every dark space where the shapes overlapped. Nothing. Just paint on canvas, arranged by my hand, depicting what my eyes had seen. I felt, I don't know how to describe it. Without sounding foolish, I felt almost disappointed. As though I'd extended an invitation that had been declined. I left the painting on the easel and went inside for lunch. Rachel and I ate sandwiches. I didn't mention the painting. Afterward, I went back out and looked at it again from a distance of about 10 feet. It was there. Not where I would have expected, not standing between the trunks in the middle distance, the way it appeared in photographs. It was at the very bottom of the canvas, at the base of the nearest tree, the one that stands at the edge of the path. Small. Not because it was far away, but because it was low. As if it were sitting, or crouching, or, and this is the interpretation I keep returning to, as if it were emerging, rising out of the ground at the roots of the tree, only partially visible, the way a person looks when they're climbing up out of a ditch. And you can see their head and shoulders, but not the rest of them. The head was there, smooth, blank, but angled upward, facing not the viewer, but the sky. I had not painted this. I had not painted anything in that part of the canvas except the base of the tree trunk and the ground beneath it. But the figure was there in the paint, in my colors, in my brushstrokes, or in something so close to my brushstrokes that I could not see the seam. I brought the painting inside and set it on the kitchen table. Rachel came in later and glanced at it and said, "That one's better." She didn't mention the figure. I looked at where it was, the crouching shape at the base of the tree, and it was unmistakable to me. But I could also see how, to someone who didn't know what to look for, it might read as shadow. A dark shape in the root structure. Ambiguous. Except it wasn't ambiguous, not to me. I painted the woods again the next day. Same view, slightly different angle. I worked faster this time, finishing by mid-morning. When I stepped back, the figure was in the painting from the start. I could see it as soon as I set down the brush. It was further into the woods this time, standing upright between 2 trees, facing the viewer. The classic position, the one I knew from 100 photographs, but there was a difference. The blank space where the face should have been was not uniformly smooth. There was a tonal variation in the paint warmer in the center, cooler at the edges that suggested depth, concavity, as if the blank were not a flat surface, but an opening. I painted it again the next day, and the next. Each morning I set up the easel and painted the same stretch of woods, and each time the figure was present in the finished painting, and each time it was different. Its position changed. Its posture changed. The quality of the blank face changed. On the fourth painting, it was close, maybe 10 yards into the trees, partially obscured by a trunk. But the head was visible and turned slightly, not quite facing the viewer, looking to the side, in the direction of the house. On the fifth painting, it was sitting, not crouching or emerging, but sitting at the base of a beech, legs extended, back against the trunk, in a posture so human and so ordinary that the facelessness was more disturbing than ever. A person resting against a tree on a warm day, except where the face should have been. There was that smooth, concave blankness, and the head was tilted back as if the person were looking up through the canopy. On the sixth painting, it was not in the woods. It was at the tree line, standing at the exact boundary where the woods end and the mowed grass begins. One hand I had not previously been able to make out hands in photographs, one hand resting on the trunk of the boundary oak. And the face, the blank, was more detailed in this painting than in any image I'd seen before. Not features, not eyes or a mouth, but the surface had organized itself into something with structure planes and hollows that suggested the architecture of a face without containing any of its elements. Like looking at a mask from behind, the inside of a face, the scaffolding that holds the expression up without being the expression itself. I sat on the porch looking at that painting for a long time. The actual tree line was right there, 50 yards away. The actual boundary oak, the actual grass. No figure visible to my eyes, just the painted version, standing where the woods meet the world, with a hand on the tree and a face that was almost a face. Rachel came out and stood behind me. She looked at the painting. I waited. "There's someone in this one," she said. "You can see it? At the edge of the trees. Is that the thing?" "Yes." She looked at it for a while. Then she looked at the actual tree line. Then back at the painting. "It looks like it's about to step out," she said. She went inside. I heard her moving in the kitchen, the sound of cabinets and water, normal evening sounds. I covered the painting with a cloth and brought it in before dark. That night, I couldn't sleep again. Not from fear, from the feeling of standing on the edge of something that was about to change its terms. 6 paintings in 6 days, and the figure had moved from deep in the woods to the tree line. It was approaching the boundary. In each image, it was closer to the open ground. I had been thinking of the paintings as portraits. But portraits don't move. Portraits don't approach. What I was making, painting by painting, was a sequence. Not a still image, but a series of still images that, taken together, described motion. I was making a film. Frame by frame, painting by painting, I was creating the conditions under which the thing in the woods could move. Not in continuous time, where it didn't exist. Not in a single frozen moment, where it could only stand and be observed. But across a sequence of frozen moments, each one a window, each window opened by my hand, step by step, painting by painting, toward the edge of the woods and whatever lay beyond. I had been thinking it wanted to be seen. Maybe it did. But maybe being seen was not the end of what it wanted. Maybe being seen was the mechanism by which it moved. Each image a footstep, each observer a path. Betty painted it for 50 years. How many paintings? She'd said 100. 100 images, 100 frames. And in all that time, it had remained in the woods, never at the boundary, never approaching the open field. Betty had not painted it deliberately. It had appeared unbidden, and she had never painted it on purpose, never aimed the canvas at the place where she expected it to be. Her paintings were of the woods, and the figure was an intrusion she tolerated. I was doing something different. I was pointing the easel at the woods because of the figure. I was composing the image around the space where it might appear. I was not capturing it accidentally. I was inviting it into a composition designed for its presence. And it was responding by covering more ground in 6 days than it had covered in Betty's 50 years. I understood this at 3 a.m, lying in bed with my wife breathing beside me. And the understanding was not horror. It was something colder and more practical than horror. It was the recognition that I had been wrong about the fundamental nature of what I was doing. I was not painting a portrait of the figure. I was building it a road. I did not paint the next morning. I went out to the porch, and I turned the easel around to face west, toward the open field. And I stood there for a while, feeling the particular weight of a decision that cannot be verified. I might have been saving something. I might have been interrupting nothing. The figure might have stopped at the tree line, regardless. The boundary between the woods and the open ground might be a limit it cannot cross no matter how many images are made. I don't know. I chose not to test it. I did not paint for 2 weeks. The visual hardening continued. Once or twice a day, that fractional seizure of clarity, the world becoming a photograph for less than a second, the shape in the periphery. I was accustomed to it by then. The way you become accustomed to a ringing in your ear, it doesn't stop. But the part of your brain that monitors it gets tired and stops reporting. Then something happened that broke the pattern. In late September, Rachel's co-worker Inez came for dinner. Inez was a graphic designer. She worked at the same firm Rachel did, doing layouts and branding for regional clients. She was good at her job and good company, and we'd had her over several times. After dinner, we were sitting on the porch, and Inez was talking about a project she was working on, a brochure for a regional tourism board. And she said she needed a good photograph of Kentucky woodland for the cover, and the stock images she'd found were all wrong. "Your woods are perfect," she said. "Can I take some pictures before I go?" Rachel looked at me. The look lasted maybe a second. Inez didn't notice. "Sure," I said. "The light's almost gone, though. You'd want to come back in the morning." "I can come Saturday," Inez said. After she left, Rachel and I stood in the kitchen and had the conversation with our eyes that married people learn to have. Then she said it aloud. "She can't take pictures of the woods." "I know. What do we tell her?" I thought about it. I thought about Dale, who'd solved the problem by never owning a camera. I thought about Betty, who'd lived with it for half a century. I thought about Dale's brother, who'd forgotten everything. "We tell her the light's better on the west side," I said. "I'll walk her out there Saturday morning. The field's pretty in September. Goldenrod. She can get her woodland shot from the western edge where the tree line reads as background. And if she walks over to the east side on her own." "She won't. I'll be with her." Rachel nodded. Then she said, "This is how it starts, isn't it?" "How what starts?" "The silence. Betty didn't tell anyone for decades. Dale doesn't tell anyone. His brother forgot. Now we're figuring out how to keep Inez from photographing the trees. This is how it becomes a thing you manage instead of a thing you talk about." She was right. I knew she was right when she said it, and I know it now. The silence around the thing in the woods is not imposed from outside. There is no institution enforcing it. There is no procedure, no classified document, no agency. There is only the individual realization that you cannot explain what you have seen, followed by the practical decision to guide other people's cameras away from the place where the inexplicable lives. Betty did it alone for 50 years. Dale has been doing it his whole adult life. And now Rachel and I were doing it, naturally and without discussion. The way you'd steer a guest away from a room in your house where the floor is weak. Not out of secrecy, out of care. Inez came Saturday. I walked her around the western field. She took beautiful photographs of goldenrod against a backdrop of trees. She never went near the eastern woods. She thanked us and left. And the photographs were lovely, and none of them contained anything that shouldn't have been there. That afternoon I sat on the porch and looked at the 6 paintings I'd made, which were leaning against the wall of the living room where I could see them through the window. 6 views of the same woods, 6 positions of the same figure, a sequence that, if continued, would have brought it to the open ground. I picked up the 6th painting, the one where it stood at the tree line with its hand on the oak, and I carried it to the porch and set it on the easel and looked at it. The figure was still there, still at the boundary, still facing out. That structured blankness where the face should have been, angled slightly downward now, as if it were looking at the grass at its feet, at the ground beyond the woods, the ground it had never touched. I looked at the painting. I looked at the actual tree line. I looked at the painting again, and I noticed something I had not seen before. In the painted grass at the figure's feet, the grass I had painted, the grass I was certain I'd painted. Because I remembered mixing the green and the yellow, there was a shadow, a small dark shape on the ground in front of the figure. Not the figure's shadow. The light in the painting came from the west, and the figure's shadow should have fallen behind it, into the woods. This shadow fell forward, onto the grass, out of the woods. It was the shape of a hand, an open hand, fingers splayed, cast on the ground like a shadow puppet. But the figure's hand was on the tree trunk. Both hands accounted for. The shadow hand belonged to nothing in the painting. Unless it was not a shadow, unless it was a reaching. I covered the painting. I put it in the closet with the other 5. I closed the closet door. October now. A year since I first found the figure in my photographs. The leaves are turning. The woods are beginning to open up as the canopy thins. From the porch I can see deeper into the trees than I could in summer. And there is nothing in there that my eyes can detect. No figure, no shape, nothing unusual. Just a beautiful stretch of Kentucky hardwood going gold and red in the shortening light. I walk the loop every day. I do not take photographs. I do not paint. The visual hardening still happens, that momentary seizure of stillness. The world becoming a frame, and when it does, the shape is there in the periphery, always there. Not closer than before, not further. Just present, in the way that something can be present in your life without being visible in your life. The way a sound you've lived with long enough becomes indistinguishable from silence. I think about the shadow hand. I think about it more than I think about the figure itself. Because the figure has been there for decades longer, probably. And it has followed a rule I can understand, even if I can't explain it. It exists in still images. It moves through sequences of still images. It cannot be seen in continuous time except by eyes that have been changed by making too many windows. These are rules. They are consistent. They are, in their own way, reassuring. But the shadow hand followed no rule I had established. The shadow hand was something new, a reaching out of the image and into the space the image depicted, a crossing of the border between the painted world and the physical world. And it was in a painting I had made for the figure, deliberately, knowing it would appear. I built a road. Something used it. And at the end of the road, something reached. I have not opened the closet since October. Deliberately, knowing it would appear. I built a road. Something used it. And at the end of the road, something reached. I have not opened the closet since October. Last week, this is the last thing I'll describe. And the reason I'm writing this now, I came home from town, and Rachel was on the porch, sitting in the chair where I usually sit. She was looking at the eastern tree line. She was very still. "Rachel?" She turned. Her eyes were focused on something that was neither close nor far. She blinked, and the focus cleared, and she looked at me normally. "I was just sitting here," she said, "looking at the trees." "For how long?" She checked her phone. "About an hour." She'd been sitting on the porch for an hour, looking at the tree line, without moving. Rachel, who does not sit still for an hour under any circumstances, who fidgets through movies and talks during sunsets and has never in her life been caught staring at anything for more than a few minutes. "Did you see anything?" I asked. She frowned slightly, the way she does when she's trying to recall something that's already fading. "I don't think so," she said. The trees looked really clear today, like I could see every single leaf." The world going hard. The visual field seizing into photographic clarity. The thing I had been experiencing for months, happening now to my wife, who had never taken a photograph of the woods, who had never painted them, who had only looked at my paintings, and at my photographs, and at the images on her mother's phone. She hadn't made any windows, but she'd looked through mine. I don't know what to do with that. I'm saying it plainly because I don't have a way to say it otherwise. I thought the risk was in the making, in the act of creating a still image. I thought if I stopped making images, the process would stop. I stopped. It didn't stop. It moved to the person nearest to me, the person who had looked at my paintings, the person who had seen the figure in the photographs, the person who had lived in the same house as 6 paintings of a faceless figure walking out of the woods toward the light. Maybe it's not the making. Maybe it's the seeing. Maybe once you've seen it, really seen it, known what you're looking at, understood that the shape in the image is not an artifact, but a presence, your vision has changed. And maybe that change is communicable. Maybe it passes from person to person, the way a melody gets stuck in your head because someone else was humming it. Maybe Betty Alford didn't give me her photographs out of kindness. Maybe she gave them to me because she'd learned, over 50 years, that the weight of seeing is lighter when it's shared. And maybe I've shared it with Rachel, not through any failure of care, but because sharing is what it does. That's its vector. Not cameras, not paintbrushes, not pencils. Those are just how it gets the first foothold. After that, it moves through the cameras, not paintbrushes, not pencils. Those are just how it gets the first foothold. After that, it moves through the act of showing someone else. Through the moment when you hold up the photograph and say, "Look at this." Every person in this story who saw the figure showed it to someone. Betty showed Dale. Dale told me. I showed Rachel. Rachel's mother took a photograph and showed it to Rachel without knowing what she was showing. Each act of sharing was an act of transmission. Each pair of new eyes was a new window. And I'm writing this and I'm going to post it. And you're going to look at the photographs if I include them. And if I don't include them, You're going to go outside with your phone and look at the nearest stand of trees and take a picture and enlarge it and scan the background between the trunks. And I can't tell you not to. And I'm not sure I want to, because the thing in the woods has been alone, if alone is even a word that applies to it, for longer than anyone in this valley can account for. And it has spent that entire time trying to be seen, not through eyes, which slide right past it, not through motion, which is the medium of the living, but through the tiny acts of stillness that human beings create when they paint or draw or press a shutter, the moments we freeze and keep because we think they're ours. They were never only ours. I'm sitting on the porch. The easel is still facing east. The closet with the paintings is 10 feet behind me. Rachel is inside, and she is fine, and she has not mentioned the tree line again. And I'm watching her the way you watch someone who might be about to see something for the first time. The leaves are falling. The woods are opening up. The light goes further in each day. And somewhere in there, in a stillness that is not the stillness between seconds, but a different kind of stillness altogether, the kind that was there before there were seconds, before there were eyes, before there was anything that moved, something is standing among the trees. It does not have a face. I think it might be trying to grow one. And I'm not sure, but I think it is using ours.